Through the Gates of the Silver Key, Part 5. A sudden shutting off of the waves left Carter in a chilling and awesome silence, full of the spirit of desolation. On every hand pressed the ultimate vastness of the void. Yet the seeker knew the being was still there. After a moment he thought of words whose mental substance he flung into the abyss. I accept. I will not retreat. The waves surged forth again, and Carter knew that the being had heard, and now there poured from the limitless mind a flood of knowledge and explanation which opened new vistas to the seeker, and prepared him for such a grasp of the cosmos as he had never hoped to possess. He was told how childish and limited is the notion of a tri-dimensional world, and what an infinity of directions there are beside the known directions of up and down, forward, backward, right, left. He was shown the smallness and tinsel emptiness of the little earth entities, with their petty human interests and connections, their hatred, rages, loves, and vanities, their craving for praise and sacrifice, and their demands for faith contrary to reason and nature. While most of the impressions translated themselves to Carter as words, there were others to which the other senses gave interpretation. Perhaps with eyes and perhaps with imagination he perceived that he was in a region of dimensions beyond those conceivable to the eye and brain of man. He saw now in the brooding shadows of that which had been first a vortex of power and then an illimitable void, a sweep of creation that dizzied his senses. From some inconceivable vantage point he looked upon prodigious forms whose multiple extensions transcended any conception of being, size, and boundaries which his mind had hitherto been able to hold. Despite a lifetime of cryptical study, he began to understand dimly why there could exist at the same time the little boy Randolph Carter in the Arkham farmhouse in 1883, the misty form on the vaguely hexagonal pillar beyond the first gate, the fragment now facing the presence in the limitless abyss, and all the other Carters his fancy or perception envisioned. Remember that Altered States movie? Then the waves increased in strength and sought to improve his understanding, reconciling him to the multiform entity of which his present fragment was an infinitesimal part. They told him that every figure of space is but the result of the intersection by a plane of some corresponding figure of one more dimension. As a square is cut from a cube, or a circle from a sphere, the cube and sphere of 3 dimensions are thus cut from corresponding forms of 4 dimensions, which men know only through guesses and dreams, and these in turn are cut from forms of 5 dimensions, and so on up to the dizzy and reachless heights of archetypal infinity. The world of men and of the entities that the men treat as gods is merely an infinitesimal phase of an infinitesimal thing, the 3-dimensional phase of that small wholeness reached by the first gate, where Umar at-Tawil dictates dreams to the ancient ones. Though men hail it as reality, and ban thoughts of its many-dimension originality as unreality, then it is in truth the very opposite. That which we call substance and reality is shadow and illusion. That which we call shadow and illusion is substance and reality. Time, the waves went on, is motionless and without beginning or end. That it has motion and is the cause of change is an illusion. Indeed, it is itself really an illusion, for except to the narrow sight of beings in limited dimensions, There are no such things as past, present, and future. Men think of time only because of what they call change, yet that too is an illusion. All that was and is to be exists simultaneously. Obviously trying to mix in a conception of what Hinduism is. These revelations came with a godlike solemnity which left Carter unable to doubt, even though they lay almost beyond his comprehension. He felt that they must be true in the light of that final cosmic reality, which belies all local perspectives and narrow partial views, and he was familiar enough with profound speculations to be free of the bondage of local and partial conceptions. Had this whole quest not been based upon a faith in the unreality of the local and partial? After an impressive pause, the waves continued, saying that what the denizens of few-dimensioned zones call change is merely a function of their consciousness, which views the external world from the various cosmic angles. As the shapes produced by the cutting of a cone seem to vary with the angles of cutting being circular, ellipse, parabola, or hyperbola, according to that angle, yet without any change in the cone itself, so do the local aspects of an unchanged and endless reality seem to change with the cosmic angle of regarding. To this variety of angles of consciousness, the feeble beings of the inner worlds are slaves, since, with rare exceptions, they cannot learn to control them. Only a few students of forbidden things have gained inklings of this control and have thereby conquered time and view the myriad parts of the cosmos in terms of fragmentary change involving perspective, are of the changeless totality beyond perspective, in accordance with their will. I wonder if he knows, if H.P. Lovecraft knew anything about Aleister Crowley. As the waves paused again, Carter began to comprehend, vaguely and terrifiedly, the ultimate background of that riddle of lost individuality, which had at first so horrified him. His intuition pieced together the fragments of revelation and brought him closer and closer to a grasp of the secret. He understood that much of the frightful revelations would have come upon him, splitting up his ego amongst myriads of earthly counterparts inside the first gate, had not the magic of Umar at-Tawil kept it from him, in order that he might use the silver key with precision for the ultimate gate's opening. Anxious for clearer knowledge, he sent out waves of thought, asking more of the exact relationship between his various facets. The fragment now beyond the ultimate gate, the fragment still on the quasi-hexagonal pedestal beyond the first gate, the boy of 1883 of the Common Era, the man of 1928, the various ancestral beings who had formed his heritage, and the bulwark of his ego, and the nameless denizens of the other aeons and other worlds which that first hideous flash of ultimate perception had identified with him. Slowly the waves of the being surged out in reply, trying to make plain what was almost beyond the reach of an earthly mind. All descended lines of beings of the finite dimensions continued the ways, and all the stages of growth in each one of these beings are merely manifestations of one archetypal and eternal being. Infant, child, boy, man is merely one of the infinite phases of that same archetypal and eternal being, caused by a variation in the angle of the conscious plane which cuts it. Randolph Carter at all ages, Randolph Carter and all his ancestors, both human and pre-human, terrestrial and pre-terrestrial, all of these were only phases of the one ultimate eternal Carter, outside space and time, phantom projections differentiated only by the angle at which the plane of consciousness happened to cut the eternal archetype in each case. A slight change of angle could turn the student of today into the child of yesterday, could turn Randolph Carter into that wizard Edmund Carter who fled from Salem to the hills behind Arkham in 1692, or that Pickman Carter who in the year 2169 would use strange means in repelling the Mongol hordes from Australia, could turn a human Carter into one of those earlier entities which had dwelt in primal Hyperborea and worshipped black plastic the Sathog Lua. After flying down from Kythamil, the double planet that once revolved around Arcturus, could turn a terrestrial Carter to a remotely ancestral and doubtfully shaped dweller on a Kythamil itself, or still a remoter creature of transgalactic Stronti, or a four-dimensioned gaseous consciousness in an older space-time continuum, or a vegetable brain of the future on a dark radioactive comet of inconceivable orbit, and so on, an endless cosmic cycle. The archetypes throbbed, the waves are the people of the ultimate abyss, formless, ineffable, and guessed at only by rare dreamers on the low-dimensioned worlds. Chief among such was his informing being itself, which indeed was Carter's own archetype, the glutless zeal of Carter and all his forebears for forbidden cosmic secrets was a natural result of derivation from the supreme archetype. On every world, all great wizards, all great thinkers, all great artists are facets of it, or better say manifestations of its power, not exactly it itself, but almost stunned with awe, and with a kind of terrifying delight, Randolph Carter's consciousness did homage to that transcendent entity from which it was derived. As the waves paused again, he pondered in the mighty silence, thinking of strange tributes, stranger questions, and still stranger requests. Curious concepts flowed conflictingly through a brain dazed with unaccustomed vistas and unforeseen disclosures. It occurred to him that, if these disclosures were literally true, he might bodily visit all those infinitely distant ages and parts of the universe which he had hitherto known only in his dreams, could he but command the magic to change the angle of his conscious plane. And did not the silver key supply that magic? Had it not first changed him from a man in 1928 to a boy in 1883, and then to something quite outside time? Oddly, despite his present apparent absence of body, he knew that the key was still with him. While the silence still lasted, Randolph Carter radiated forth the thoughts and questions which assailed him. He knew that in this ultimate abyss, he was equidistant from every facet of his archetype, human or non-human, terrestrial or extraterrestrial, galactic or transgalactic, and his curiosity regarding the other phases of his being, especially those phases which were the farthest from an earthly 1928 in time and space, or which had most persistently haunted his dreams throughout his life, was at fever heat. He felt that his archetypal entity could at will send him bodily to any of these phases of bygone and distant life by changing his conscious plane, and despite the marvels he had undergone, he burned for the further marvel of walking in the flesh through those grotesque and incredible scenes which visions of the night had fragmentarily brought him. Without definite intention, he was asking the presence for access to a dim, fantastic world whose 5 multicolored suns, alien constellations, dizzily black crags, clawed taper-snouted denizens, bizarre metal towers, unexplained tunnels, and cryptical floating cylinders had intruded again and again upon his slumbers. That world, he felt vaguely, was in all the conceivable cosmos, the one most freely in touch with others, and he longed to explore the vistas whose beginnings he had glimpsed, and to embark through space to those still remoter worlds with which the clawed-snouted denizens trafficked. There was no time for fear. As at all crises of his strange life, sheer cosmic curiosity triumphed over everything else. When the waves resumed their awesome pulsing, Carter knew that his terrible request was granted. The being was telling him of the nighted gulfs through which he would have to pass, of the unknown quintuple star in a suspected galaxy around which the alien world revolved, and of the burrowing inner horrors against which the clawed, snouted race of that world perpetually fought. It told him, too, of how the angle of his personal consciousness plane and the angle of his conscious plane regarding the space-time elements of the sought-for world would have to be tilled simultaneously in order to restore to that world the Carter facet which had dwelt there. The presence warned him to be sure of his symbols if he wished ever to return from the remote and alien world he had chosen, and he radiated back an impatient affirmation, confident that the silver key which he felt was with him, and which he knew had tilled both world and personal planes, in throwing him back to 1883, contained those symbols which were meant. And now the being grasping his impatience signified its readiness to accomplish the monstrous precipitation. The waves abruptly ceased, and there supervened a momentary stillness, tense with nameless and dreadful expectancy. Then, without warning, came a whirring and drumming that swelled to a terrific thundering. Once again, Carter felt himself the focal point of an intense concentration of energy, which smote and hammered and seared unbearably in the now familiar rhythm of outer space, and which he could not classify as either the blasting heat of a blazing star or the all-petrifying cold of the ultimate abyss. Bands and rays of color, utterly foreign to any spectrum of our universe, played and wove and interlaced before him, and he was conscious of a frightful velocity of motion. He caught one fleeting glimpse of a figure sitting alone upon a cloudy throne, more hexagonal than otherwise. Is this what's going on at Saturn's pole, the hexagonal thing? Or am I thinking Jupiter? I think it's Saturn.